everyone, and welcome to a new episode of The Modern Rider, the first equestrian podcast that brings together sport and horsemanship. A special place to discover inspiring interviews with top equestrian professionals to help us become better, more aware, and more responsible riders. One of the hottest topics in the horse welfare conversation today is biomechanics. How should a horse move to become a healthier athlete? What should we do or avoid to prevent injuries and premature retirement? These are crucial questions that, let's be honest, very few of us truly know how to answer. Especially in a way that's up-to-date and adapted to modern riding and today's sports horses, which are not the same as they were 10 or 20 years ago. And one of the few people who can answer these questions is our guest today, Karin Leibbrandt. A veterinarian with over 20 years of experience, equine rehabilitation specialist, author, and founder of 4DimensionDress. After turning her back on a big part of the industry's fast-track, profit-first mindset, Karin developed a complete and holistic training method blending the classical dressage scale with modern biomechanics. Her approach helps riders build a sustainable system that supports long-term performance, allows horses to develop at their own pace, and strengthens the horse-rider partnership. In this interview, Karin shares her experience and philosophy without filters, unafraid to say out loud what many in the industry stay silent about. The result, a powerful and eye-opening conversation that just might shift the way we view training altogether. From foundational biomechanical concepts to the challenges of working with hypermobile horses, and even her analysis of the current state of competitive sport, we dive deep into the world of equine biomechanics and its direct link to horse welfare. As always, don't hesitate to leave a rating, a comment, or share this episode with your fellow riders. It's the best way to support the podcast and, most importantly, to amplify the valuable voices of our guests. So turn up the volume and get comfortable. It's time for another inspiring conversation. Welcome, Karin. I'm really glad to have you on the podcast today and to talk about the great work you're doing with the horses in our sport. So welcome, first of all.
Thank you.
To start with this conversation, and for the people who might not know you, would you mind tell us a bit about your journey into the equestrian world and how you became so passionate about equine biomechanics and horse training?
Yes, well, I studied veterinary school. So I graduated in, I think, 2002, so already a long time ago. And I always wanted to be a veterinarian for sport horses because the picture I had in my mind was that sport horses can only perform really very well if they are healthy, both physically and mentally. So that's why I wanted to study veterinary science to help horses and other animals to be very, very healthy. But when I was studying, I found out that it was actually about how can I keep a horse as long as possible in the sport, even if there are problems and injuries starting. And how can I administer medication without being positively tested in the doping test. So that was a bit of a shock. And of course, it was quite naive to believe that it's all about health and well-being of the horse in the sport. But, well, okay, I sort of believe that. So that was not the direction where I wanted to go. And then at the end of veterinary school, I also found out that the average age of the sport horse in the Netherlands before the insurance companies take them over because they are not fit enough anymore to perform or even being ridden under saddle, is 7 or 8 years old. So I was like, okay, what's going on? Because this is not normal, of course. And so that's why my journey started and how it started. I wanted to know what is happening to all those horses. Why do they get all kinds of lameness, all kinds of back problems and lower neck problems? So to find out that the training is a big part of it, but not the only part of it. But of course, it is actually what we do with horses, how we breed them, how we train them, how we feed them, how we keep them, what kind of saddle we use, etc., etc. So it was actually a journey of 20 years already, and still learning every week.
Sure. And so you developed your own training method, which is the 4D dressage, right?
Yeah.
Do you mind explaining a bit how you came to this training method and what it is about?
Yes. Well, I think about 15 years ago, I met a trainer called Antoine de Bot, and he explained me about vertical balance. And he also said, and he was very black and white, he said, don't pull the horse into a certain position. So don't force the horse to go into a certain position with the head and the neck, because a correct forward, downward, outward posture comes from the correct balance in the horse. The head and the neck position of the horse comes from the correct balance, so the correct vertical balance, and the correct horizontal balance. So this was really a game changer for me, because I was also I did ride my horses with light contact, but I was also taught to ride the horses a bit behind the vertical, or maybe not extreme, but still behind the vertical, because it was good for their suppleness in the back. But I also noticed that all horses start to resist it at a certain moment. So if you have a young horse, of course, they are willing to go behind the bit, and they are very sensitive in the mouth. So if they feel the pressure on the bit, they they try to get rid of the pressure, so they go behind the vertical. But at a certain moment, it gets uncomfortable, more and more uncomfortable, so they start to resist it. So I was very happy to meet Antoine de Bot, because he explained me about vertical balance and the importance about vertical balance, and that forward, downward, out is a result of a good vertical balance. So I started to use this principle in the rehabilitation horses, and with very, very big, amazing results. But then I started to think, okay, so if we want the horse to bend to the left in the head and the neck, where does it come from? It comes from the core. And when so instead of bending the neck, we need to bend the core, and the neck is following what is happening in the core. And when the horse, when we want to have a higher head and neck position, it should come from more collection in the core. So in every situation, the head and neck posture of the horse that the horse chooses to take is a result of a reflection of the good training of the entire body of the horse, so the core of the horse. And to make this a little bit more easier to understand, I cut it into 4 dimensions. So we should be able to position the horse in vertical balance. We should position the horse in horizontal balance, which is actually shifting more weight to the hindquarters. We need a correct lateral flexion, which is the 3rd dimension. And that lateral flexion should start in the core and not in the head and the neck. And we need to be able to change the direction of the forehand and the hindquarters of the horse. And I call that the direction in the lateral plane, because you can, well, if you position the forehand to the left and you keep the hindquarters at the same position, you have a movement in the diagonal plane. And of course, you need to be able to change the energy of the horse. So the principles of the system are very easy, but if you need to put them into practice, it is more difficult. And what also, because I know there are many good classical trainers, but the principles of classical dressage are based on horses from 100 years or 200 years ago. And these horses had a different conformation. They were naturally in balance already, and they were not hypermobile. And this changed a lot in especially the last 20 years, that horses are getting more and more hypermobile and they have a completely different conformation. So I cannot really easily shift the weight from the front to the hind. The vertical balance is really a sort of missing key to actually the first step that we should do to make it possible for these horses to start to stabilize themselves. So the classical masters, the old school masters, they had to make a horse more supple. But now we have to stabilize the horses. So we need to do one step before we can follow the principles of classical dressage, and that is the vertical balance in combination with the stabilization of the core.
Okay, I have like two questions that came in my mind when you were talking. First of all, maybe for the people who are not aware about what is the hypermobility, I won't say problem, but like what it is when you're talking about this.
Yeah. So normally when we had a horse of 100 years ago, or maybe even 60 years ago, these horses, we had to train them about 8 years to get enough suppleness in these horses. And the movements are not as spectacular as we can see in the horses nowadays. So they wanted to transform these horses into sport horses. We needed taller horses. We wanted more elegant horses. So we started to select these horses, and we started to breed with, for example, with thoroughbred to make the horses more elegant. And we wanted to have a little bit more blood in it. So because then a horse can be more flashy. So what happened is that we wanted to breed for more flexibility, but if you take that too far, you get hypermobility. And hypermobility is an increased range of motion of all the joints in the body of the horse, because the connective tissue is not strong enough anymore to stabilize these joints. And there is not one type of hypermobility. Horses can have many different types of hypermobility. So some horses only have it in the lower joints, some horses only in the spine, some horses only in the fetlock joints. But if you have an animal of 600, 700 kilograms and you make the connective tissue that holds the entire body of the horse together, if you make that too supple, the horse cannot stabilize itself anymore. And this means that the tendons and the joints are overloaded. They have many tendon injuries, ligament injuries. So the ligaments and the tendons are just not strong enough to carry the weight of these horses anymore. And it goes, I can talk for 3 hours about hypermobility, but it's also, it has an impact on the immune system. It has an impact on metabolism. It has an impact on the organs, because all the organs, they have sort of three-dimensional network of fascia that holds the entire organ together. So if there's something wrong with the connective tissue, you can also get all kinds of problems with organs. We see more problems with head shaking or other kinds of neurological problems in those hypermobile horses. So that's in short what hypermobility is.
So do you think this is the main challenge that we have we are having right now with horses in sport in the training method we are using?
Yeah, I think that the breeding and the training, in that combination, that is the biggest challenge at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And to just give you an example, today I spoke with one of my students, and she bought a 1.5-year-old horse. This horse is 4 years old now. And at this moment, the horse is already sinking through the fetlock joints that much that in walk, it's maybe a few centimeters above the ground, but in trot, it almost touches the ground. And this horse is already having problems with the hook and the suspensory ligaments. And this horse is just 4 years old. So this horse is so hypermobile. She's uncomfortable. She doesn't develop her musculature. So this horse will never be able to carry a rider. So it will never be a riding horse. And probably we have to end her life in the near future because she is so uncomfortable because of the hypermobility. And this is why I speak a lot about hypermobility, because sometimes I get videos from all over the world. It doesn't matter. It's important everywhere. And it's a situation we are in the entire world. From 2-year-old horses with the fetlock joints already touching the ground. And this is, of course, not a good development for the well-being of horses, because these horses are uncomfortable in their body, even if they are just growing and not being trained, not doing any work.
And what are the common injuries you used to see coming from a training method?
Well, if we train a horse behind the vertical, and the more the horse is behind the vertical and the more force we use, the more problems the horse gets in most of the time in first instance in the neck, in the second and the third vertebrae, but also the lower neck. Last summer we had 11 rehabilitation horses, and 100% of these horses had osteoarthritis or synovitis in the sixth and the seventh vertebrae. And I can compare now with 10, 15 years ago. And then this was not the percentage we were dealing with. We also had less complicated cases, so normal kissing spines or small injuries. But now I see a lot of injuries in one horse. And most of the time I see 5-year-old horses or sometimes 6-year-old horses already with 4 or 5 severe problems in their body to rehabilitate. So other than the problems in the lower neck and the second and the third vertebrae, we also see kissing spines, problems with the SI joints, but also the suspensory ligaments.
So that will come from the fact that they've been trained behind the vertical, or is there something else that we're not doing right here?
Well, it's the combination of the breeding, because we started to breed with thoroughbred, and we have a few stallions we used to make the horses more elegant. And these lines, they also give the hypermobility, probably, most likely, but they also give longer cannon and longer pastern bones, which make the legs of the horse longer, but it's also giving less control of the limbs because they sort of have to swing them forward. And also the tendons, they are the diameter of the tendon. So the leg is longer, but the diameter of the tendon is less. So the breeding is a big problem. And because thoroughbreds have a raised skeleton, the angles of the hind legs are bigger, which makes the hind leg longer. And the angles of the front legs are shorter, which makes the front of smaller, so which makes the front leg shorter. And this is causing the hindquarters to be higher than the front. And because the rib cage has a different shape, like a whippet, so the race dogs, they have a very low sternum and very high withers. But the withers are high because of the length of the spinal processes. So the weight of the horse is now not behind the elbow anymore, but it's going more forward. And because the hind legs or the hindquarters are higher, we see a tilting under of the pelvis too much. So in dressage, they are always talking about we have to tilt the pelvis under. Well, I have to do the opposite first because they are already sort of squeezing their gluteal muscles to tilt the pelvis under. They have a flexion in the lumbar area, but they drop in the first part of the back. And they also drop in the low part of the neck, so in the lower part of the neck. So we have what I call an incorrect flexion extension pattern. They have hyperflexion in C2, C3. They have extension in the lower neck and first part of the back. And they have hyperflexion in the lumbar area and the pelvis. So if we have that incorrect flexion extension pattern, especially the first part of the back is an extension, so that drops, and the rider is sitting there. So we see the spinal processes going closer together because of this flexion extension pattern, incorrect flexion extension pattern, but also the weight is going more and more to the forehand. The front legs are standing on the ground too long and the hinds are behind the body, and this is causing all kinds of problems in joints and the suspensory ligaments and all kinds of other ligaments. So it's always the combination. Do you want hypermobile horses? No, you don't want them. But if you have them and you train them correctly, in most cases, you can really help them and keep them sound.
So there's a way to train them on a more healthy way.
Absolutely. But this is really difficult because people are so used to the picture that horses need to be behind the vertical. And even if we look at FEI dressage rules, they say that the poll should be the highest point and the nose should be at or slightly in front of the vertical, and this is in a collected position. But if we actually take a horse to a competition and we actually do keep the nose slightly in front of the vertical, we always hear the horse is too long in the neck, because people are so used to that picture of horses behind the vertical. And even in the case of those really hypermobile horses, a little bit behind the vertical can already cause that incorrect flexion extension pattern and therefore causing all kinds of problems in the back.
It seems that this is changing, though, because when we saw the last Olympic Games, for example, most of the top riders were riding in front of the vertical. I found that the frame changed.
Yes, but you have to look a little bit further than that, because what they actually did, they lifted the head more, so the nose gets in front of the vertical, but the neck is in extension and the first part of the back was also in extension. So to be able to get the nose in a correct way in front of the vertical, the horse should lift the withers, lift the first part of the back, and make a nice arch upwards and forward in the neck. But we can see that the horses in the Olympics, they are too short in the neck. But if you it's difficult to explain without drawing it, but they are too, so they started probably in the warm-up arena, low, deep, and round. Then from there, they went to roll cure, and then they sort of pulled the head and the neck backwards into extension, and then the nose is at the vertical. But it's not the correct length in the neck, and you can see that because the sternum is still very low, and the first part of the back, which is of course difficult to see because there's a rider sitting there. But you can see that the front legs are moving spectacularly, but the hinds are behind. So there is an incorrect trot diagonal because the fronts are lifting too much and the hinds are lifting way too less.
Okay, and how?
Well, so if I can add one more thing.
Sure.
The dressage in the eventing horses was actually quite nice, because they really did have a pretty correct head posture. So I was very happy to see that.
It is difficult because when you need an expert eye to see this, then, like, even if you've been riding, if you're a dressage rider, not at an Olympic level, but maybe national, international level, it seems that, and the rates are here to tell that this is what they have to look at, that should be the goal then. So it is really difficult to understand. What could they do then to train their horse properly and to achieve this collected position to be able to reach this level? Because I'm quite sure that at the end of the day, this is what they're looking for in the dressage arena. Maybe we're not there, but in the, I don't have the word, but this is what they're looking for. Maybe we don't have the eye to see it properly, and there are like so many conditions, like the judges, they see what they see from where they're at, and it's quite difficult. But what could we do then to reach this goal of collected horse in the more a fair way, to say
way,
so? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, time. We need time because nowadays we want, if you want to sell a 5-year-old horse and this horse is not at a good dressage level, and of course in every country it is different, but let's say in Germany it is, I think, M level, then the horse is not good. So we started breeding horses for more suppleness to make our life easier, and we can get the results easier and faster. Everything needs to be fast because if you want to sell a horse and if you want to earn money, you don't want to keep the horse for 10 years in your stable because it's hard to earn anything then. So what we do, quite a lot of riders do know how to get a reasonable forward, downward, outward posture. And then we want collection, and then we shorten the neck because we are sort of holding the horse together. But it takes a lot more time because if the horse is really collecting in a correct way, this actually means that the horse needs to activate the thoracic sling more. So the serratus ventralis is one of the muscles that is involved, but also the pectoral musculature. If the horse can lift the withers better, they can start to close the underline. They have to sink in the hindquarters. And this actually means that the angles in the leg are getting smaller. So when the horse is landing on the ground, it means that he goes down because he has to sink through his hind leg. And that is actually taking a lot of muscle strength. And it takes a lot of time to build that muscle strength up. But if you want to go faster, you have to cheat. You have to shorten the neck of your horse, but actually the more collected head and neck position comes from shortening the underline and comes from strengthening the structures in the entire body, but in this case, especially the hind leg. So the horse is able to really shift the weight to the hind legs. And because the underline of the horse is shortening, you also get a seemingly shorter neck, but still with the nose in front of the vertical and the withers that are lifting. But that takes a lot of time. And especially in hypomobile horses, because it takes them more time to build up the strength in their musculature, but also in their connective tissue. But it is possible. But also, everything needs to be about spectacular, no halting anymore and greeting, just fast, go, spectacular, flashy. But that is not what dressage was all about. It was about harmony. It was about being in connection with your horse, about lightness, about effortlessness. And this completely changed. So we should have another look at the dressage test and go back to harmony because we are dealing with an animal and not with a motorbike that you can use for whatever you want.
So because we hear a lot that we like in training that the low, deep and round would help to develop muscles and that the horse would use the core doing this. So would this be a method to go faster then?
Yes, for several reasons. If you ask a horse low, deep and round or volcure, you can control the horse. If you want the horse to take your hand and position the nose in front of the vertical, the horse has to do it voluntarily because the horse needs to take our hand. And we cannot force the horse to take our hand, but we can force the horse if we pull on the reins and position the head in a certain position. So building up trust and confidence and the strength to follow my hand and to be really on the bit takes a lot more time. And because the hypermobile horses are also very spooky and sensitive and sometimes, in an anxiety, difficult to ride. So we want control. And if we ride the horses behind the vertical, and especially in low, deep and round, they don't see their environment anymore, not that much. So it's easier to control them because of that aspect as well. And if you do the low, deep, and around, and you can put energy into the horse and you hold them in front, the energy needs to go somewhere and you get the spectacular movements. But if you look at a video from those horses in slow motion, you can see that they are irregular because the front legs and the hinds are just, they are not rhythmical. They go all the way. Every step is different from the other one. So yes, you can speed it up, but in every aspect it is incorrect.
And you talked before about the vertical movement, and it is a point that sometimes we miss in the training routine, in our training routine. What kind of exercise would you recommend to get better and include more this movement in the range that we're using?
Yeah, well, it's the vertical balance and not the vertical movement. The vertical balance is the horse positioning the thorax, so the core, as completely in the middle of the shoulder blades. So horses have shoulder blades and they don't have connection with the core with like we have a clavicular bone. They don't have a bony structure. So their core is hanging in between their shoulder blades with musculature. And therefore it is more difficult to stabilize this. So if the horse is vertically out of balance, it actually means that the core is rotating to, for example, to the left. So the withers are rotating to the left and they are lowering. And the head needs to go upwards to the right as a compensation. So the horse needs the head and the neck as a counterbalance. If we see horses in nature taking a turn, they always throw their weight on the inside shoulder and they keep their head upwards and outwards to balance themselves. But of course, we don't want that. We want the horse to, in first instance, take forward, downward, outward posture. So if we position the core of the horse exactly in the middle of the shoulder blades, we have vertical balance. And the horse doesn't need to use the head as a counterbalance anymore, so it will straighten the neck. And if the withers are rotating to the left and they are also lowering, if we put the withers straight upwards, it also lifts already. And when the first part of the back is lifting, the horse goes into a forward, downward, outward posture because the back is getting into flexion. So the neck also wants to go into a nice arch because it's following the core of the horse. So I cannot really say that there is a certain exercise to do this, but how I teach my horses this on the lunging line already.
Okay.
So if they are falling inwards, I ask them to go outwards. So instead of making a circle, I make a square. And if the horse is on a circle and it's falling inwards and I tell them, no, go outwards, they will rebalance themselves. So they will shift the too much weight on the left front or the inside front to the outside until there is equal weight on both front legs. And then, so I send the horse outwards. And at the moment that I see that the horse is going into forward, downward, outward posture, I know, hey, this horse is in vertical balance. So I teach them to do that. And later I add more collection to it and more lateral flexion by making the circle smaller. And if they find more balance, they can go outwards again. So this is how I actually start. And when I'm riding the horses under the saddle, so this is always difficult to imagine, but imagine that I have a right bent horse on the left rein. This horse is falling on the inside shoulder. And my inside rein is heavy. That's the strong rein. And the outside rein is empty because the horse is using the head outwards to use the head as a counterbalance. And this horse is actually pushing with the outside hind into the left shoulder, into my left hand. So I release the inside rein so the horse cannot lean on my inside rein anymore. And I connect the outside rein. In first instance, the horse will overbend the neck even more outwards. But of course, his neck is attached to his core. So if I ask the head to go outwards enough, the withers, the shoulders will follow, and the horse will position the weight on the outside shoulder, on the outside front leg. And at the moment he does that, and it's of course not all of his weight, but the too much weight on the inside, he shifts that to the right front, the outside front. And at that moment, the horse wants to straighten the neck. So he wants to take my outside rein, and I give my outside rein, and the horse ends up with a straight neck in forward, downward, outward posture. And then I gently reconnect my inside rein, because I know as soon as the horse feels that I'm taking a little bit too much inside rein, they will be like, oh, that's nice. I can lean on the inside rein again. So it sounds very easy, but you can ask all of my students how difficult this actually is, because you need to be really precise. How much do you need to take your right rein? When do you release? How fast do you release? How much do you release? And you have to balance yourself really well, because the horse is the unstable part. So the rider needs to be very stable to be able to help the horse to find stabilization and balance.
And what are the most important signs riders should look for to assess whether their training methods are truly benefiting their horse physically and mentally?
Yeah. Well, when I worked more than 15 years ago with rehabilitation horses, it was actually easier, because we didn't have the horses that are really sensitive and in anxiety that quickly. But now we're getting more and more of these horses. So I can say you need to relax the horse, and you need to give them confidence and trust, etc. But that is difficult, because their nervous system is so sensitive that every trigger can cause a lot of stress and tension in these horses. So we didn't make it easier on ourselves. We made it more difficult. But this is how I start, building up a connection with the horse, gaining his trust and confidence so we can communicate. And then we start to make a bit of basic rules. You don't run over me, and you don't bite me, you don't kick me. And then we start to play a little bit with what is possible. So I take it step by step, so the horses don't get into an anxiety because they don't understand what I'm asking. And I can motivate them sometimes, but I don't force them. So you know that your training is beneficial to the horse if the horse starts to be more calm, more mentally in balance, and you have long-term and short-term characteristics. So in the short term, if I balance the horse, it will go into forward, downward, outward posture. And if I balance the horse more into the horizontal plane, the movement will get better. He will be more swinging movements, dancing movements. The landing will be softer. The breathing will be calmer, etc., etc. But in the long term, I want to see the horse gaining more and more confidence, getting more and more relaxed. But then it's also important how his body is developing. So I want a good top line. I want the first part of the back to lift. So I don't want the withers and then a dip and then the flexion in the lumbar area. And I want the musculature to develop in a correct way. So not too much musculature in the underline of the neck, not too much musculature in the gluteus muscle, but then only the first part and the hamstrings that are overdeveloping. And the muscles need to be soft and full, round and soft. So if we see too many lines in them, and if we see parts of the body that are underdeveloped, then there is something wrong.
It's really interesting. And on the other hand, I'm sure there's a lot of people into sport that won't understand it because because the basis, when you say, is the same that we're all looking at to get to relax the horse. And I mean, the words you're saying are the same.
Yes.
The training method, then it is different. And I believe it's really hard for like a dressage rider to say like that they should then, if they want to have a healthier and more sustainable training, change not entirely, but a big part of the training. How first, like when this kind of profile come to you to ask for help, when do they come and why do they come, and how do they receive your training method?
Yeah. Well, most of the time when people are really competition riders on a higher level, they only come when they have had a lot of problems with their horses and when there is no solution for the horses anymore. And then, of course, it's difficult because the more problems a horse has, the more difficult it is to rehabilitate a horse. So I don't see many high-level competition riders because for them it needs to go fast. So they prefer to inject their horses and to just go on. But of course, I do have many recreational competition riders, and yeah, it's completely different. Some people they prioritize their horses, and if they feel that it is working for their horses, they start to be really motivated to change things. And some people are under the influence of the people on their stable that are saying, what are you doing? And this is no way to train your horse because you cannot ride competitions, or they are too attached to competitions themselves, or it's difficult for people to do something else than most people do because you have to be different and you will get quite a lot of criticism. Well, I don't mind about that because I do what feels right for me. But I know that for most people, it doesn't work like that. And I understand that it's difficult then because most people want to be part of a group. Um, yeah, so it's very different. But I do see that there is a development going on. It's going actually quite quickly at the moment because the horses are more sensitive to injuries. So many people have had a lot of problems with their horses. If it is not the injuries, then it is the behavioral part. So more and more people are searching for answers because, of course, you can have bad luck with one horse, maybe with two horses. But if you had to put two or three horses to sleep, then there is something wrong. So it is really changing. And I also believe that the awareness of people is changing, that they really start to think, what's good for my horse and is it really good for my horse? And we also have many courses now at the moment about behavior and facial expression. So people start actually to see that a horse can be confident and calm, or a horse can seem calm because it is submissive. But a submissive horse, because it is forced to be submissive by role cure and a strong hand of the rider, this horse shows all kinds of signs of discomfort. And a really confident horse and a really calm horse doesn't. So I think that is a really good development. And well, I have to say, I have a wonderful group of people around me, and the group is growing, and they are really searching for ways to do it as good as possible for the horses.
But there's people as well that, because I worked and I still work, like sometimes as a groom, I worked in an Olympic stable. And I saw with a woman who doesn't need to sell horses to keep them sound and well, and that she never rushed them. She doesn't have the need to compete them quickly. She's got a few horses retired. They're way more than 20 years old. They've been competing at really high level. They have all sort of care every month. And they don't have, it happens like with some horses of that level of sports, like some injuries, but most of the time it's not like they're not big injuries and it's not often. And she works with a classical training method, and she's quite of an example for a lot of people. So when I hear you, which I totally agree with what you said with the training method, I feel that there's not so much of a distance between the two way of working and the way of seeing the horse. And I wonder how we could find maybe a way to find an agreement, let's say, between, because I feel like the distance is not that there's not such a gap between the two way of doing things. There's obviously people in the top level sports, and we saw it lately in the last month that there's big problems that we have to address. On the other side, like talking with people and seeing something I see, I don't see that. And if I put myself in the shoes of someone who's training high level, it's really hard to make a decision, because if, like, which way to take then? Like, if it's working for her, she loves her horses to bits. She's not rushing them. I listen to her advice, or I'm inspired of her way of doing, and she's an Olympic. Then why should I change? I don't know if you know what I
Well,
mean.
but if you're talking about classical dressage, that is something else that what is happening at the moment. Classical dressage is actually with the nose at or in front of the vertical. And it's not forced. So she probably is training the horses in a different way than what is happening in most stables at Olympic level, because they are riding low, deep, and round and roll cure with a lot of force. So I don't think that her ideas and my ideas are so far apart. But if we look at the Helgstrand stables,
Yeah.
we are on another planet. So I am very happy to hear about this lady, because she's probably doing a lot of good work and an inspiration, and she's giving a really good example.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the riders that I'm talking about, or
Okay.
the training system that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. I'm addressing these because, like, I feel that we have a big problem of communication in the equestrian sector that I believe is not helping to progress and to go towards a more modern way of riding, and to keep on evolving with our sports. And that's why I do it, because I sometimes feel that we need to see that there's good example everywhere. But lately it's true that, and for good reasons, we talked about a lot about what's happening in the high level sport, and the matter we have to address. But it creates, I feel, like a huge gap and rejection towards then all the people in the in the top level sports, when I believe we should create bridge and open the communication. So I believe we have to see this too, and see that it'd be great to find this reference and see that it's doable for everyone, and that we can see this kind of good sport and good training in high level too. I don't
Yes,
know.
absolutely. Yeah. So I think that the lady you were talking about is doing really a wonderful job, and that she is an example. Um, but what you are talking about is making a bridge. I've been thinking about this, but it is impossible to have a conversation for me with somebody who finds it normal that their horses have a blue tongue, and that their horses have problems with their jaw because there's a lot of pressure from the bits. So as long as people find it normal that there is so much pressure on the bit that the blood circulation of the tongue is restricted, this means that you prioritize your results above your horse. And the lady you were talking about is prioritizing her horses. And I think that the gap is actually really too big, but I think it is important that the FEI is following his own rules, because according to the FBI, there are rules about the nose bend, there are rules about contact, neck, highest position, paw in the highest position, etc., etc. But they don't follow their own rules. There are rules about low, deep, and round in the warm-up arena, etc., etc., but they don't follow their own rules. But I think that if the FEI starts to keep their own rules and work according to them, so really disqualify somebody who's training the horse low, deep, and round in the warm-up arena, disqualify somebody with a horse with blood in the mouth, disqualify somebody with a horse with a blue tongue. Because I think this is really necessary to give space for a new generation, because I know that there is a new generation of young riders, and not the young riders, but young people who are training horses, who actually have more awareness and do want to do it in a different way. They're already talking that they want to keep it more light and that they don't want to force the horse that much, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
So this generation is starting to grow, but if people really don't understand that you are abusing your horse if there is blood coming out of his mouth because he didn't feel his tongue anymore because it was blue, what can we say? Then we are stuck. So I actually do see the future quite bright, because I know that there is a different generation of riders now starting.
Yeah, and the FEI is trying at least to get better at this. I mean, we saw even like last year, huge rider being penalized like that they have to stop because they had the horse had blood in mouth or in part of his body. So I believe we're moving towards something better and more oriented towards the welfare of the horse. So yeah, let's see what's coming next then.
Yes, absolutely.
We're getting at the end of this interview. To end, I used to ask a few questions to all my guests. So if you don't mind answering them too. The first one, if there any message you would like to share with the equestrian community?
Well, there are so many messages, but I think that what I see with all of my students and people that train with me, that if you really balance your horse, the horses get really soft and gentle, and you can connect them in a very special way. And then you can really start to feel the being of the horse. And that always gives the riders a big smile when they start to feel that. So if we can go back a little bit into that true connection with another being, and I know it sounds really, because I'm actually a biomechanist. So I train the horses biomechanically, but there's also another layer. We have a spiritual being there as well. So if we just take that a little bit more into consideration and start to enjoy the connection with another spiritual being, you get into a sort of very happy state of mind.
Very nice. Is there anyone you'd recommend me to interview in a future episode of the podcast?
That depends a little bit on with what area.
Any great professional from the horse sector?
Yeah. Well, recently I was in the Czech Republic to do a 2-day clinic, and I don't know her last name, but I can find it out for you. Her name is Alison. She's now 81, and she's still teaching full days. So she's coming over to the Czech Republic once or twice a year for 8 days. And she has done so many wonderful things. So interesting story of her life. She went to the United States, and there she started up a training center. But she went back to the UK because she missed the equestrian level in the UK. And she's a really very nice classical trainer with a lot of experience and a very inspiring lady.
I'm curious to know who she is.
Yeah, I will try to find more details for you.
Yeah, I'd love to. Is there any book or resources you'd like to recommend?
Well, of course, my own book.
Of course.
But other than that, well, I find the problem with books is I prefer online courses
Mm-hmm.
because you can see. So what I would search for, because I don't want to recommend one thing, but what I would search for is something that really fits you and something you understand. So we also have online courses, and what I do is very logical if you have a logical analytic brain. But some people need the information in another way. So I would advise everybody just to have a look around and just test out what works for you and listen to your horse.
Perfect. I'll put all the links anywhere from of your book and course. And last one, here at the Modern Rider, we're keen on music, and there is a playlist of the guests' favorite and motivational songs. And I'd like to ask you if there's one you'd like to add to this playlist.
Without me knowing the playlist.
It can be anything, just like one of your favorite song.
Okay. Well, You're the Voice is my favorite song from John Farnham.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Karin. It was a really interesting conversation that I'm sure it would contribute to help the equestrians community to get further in their comprehension and in of the training of their horse and start thinking about like how they can do it even better. So thank you. Thank you for your work. And
thank you very much for your invitation. It was really nice.
And all the best for what's coming next for you.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope this conversation was as insightful for you as it was for me. You'll find more details about Karin's work along with links to her book in the episode notes. And as always, I want to remind you that your support truly makes a difference. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to leave a rating or a comment, and don't hesitate to share it with your friends or community. It's one of the best ways to help spread these valuable insights. Thanks again for spending your time with us today, and I'll see you in 2 weeks for another exciting interview.